So I just want to thank Thaddeus and Stephanie. I want to thank Wedge Asia and Green is the New Black for having us all here this morning. Thank you. So many things going on. So yes, my name is Kate Black, and I want to talk to you today about ethical fashion and sustainable living. I launched my blog, Magnifico.com, in 2008 because I believe in the power of words and stories to make change. Just from a show of hands, how many makers are in the room? And designers? And social entrepreneurs? Yay, welcome. And conscious consumers? Yay! So I started Magnifico.com because I was inspired by the food movement. So in the US in 2002, they launched an organic seal, and the growth sales happened at 20% per year. So by the time I started Magnifico.com in 2008, the organic market had gone from 0 to 10% penetration. And I thought, oh, this could happen for fashion. If only consumers knew what was happening. They knew about the designers, they knew about the efforts that brands were making to make better products. So I launched Magnifico.com as kind of a daily eco-fashion find. And I was featuring designers, I was featuring like new innovations in the ways of making and dealing with makers. And it went on like this for several years. In 2011, I added men's fashion, kids fashion, non-toxic beauty, travel. And then in last fall, out came my book. And then last month, out came a podcast. So now it's a weekly podcast where you can hear from makers and doers. And I also founded Ecosessions because I wanted us to have a platform where we can have these conversations together. So we're now meeting up monthly in Berlin, London, Toronto, Montreal, New York, and LA to have these conversations face to face, because I think it's one thing to be able to read about it. It's one thing to get inspiration from stories about other people, but I think when you're in the same room, magic happens. I think collaborations happen. I think we can make a whole bunch of things happen. And we don't just talk about fashion, we talk about beauty, we talk about sustainable living, but fashion, I believe, is where we can make significant change. If we take a look at the industry as a whole, it's the third largest. It's the second when it comes to intensity of trade, and it's a $3 trillion business. It's also the second most polluting of fresh water. And this is because from seed to shelf, everything requires water. If you think about pesticides in cotton, you think about all the water that goes into making textiles, all the water that goes into manufacturing apparel, dyeing, finishing, washing. And we're not stopping. So we're at a stage now where the industry is producing 150 billion garments per year. And it doesn't matter whether or not you think fashion is runways and glossy magazines, we're all wearing clothes. This affects every single one of us. And we have the opportunity to make change. And I really still take inspiration from the food movement because I think that we're at a stage now where we get what we eat, we get the choices that we make about the food that we consume has a direct impact on our health, but we haven't gotten to the point yet where we recognize that what we put next to our skin, which is our largest organ, also has an impact on our health. And again, I go back to the food movement because I think it's quite telling. In 2001, the CDC started to measure what is called a body burden. How many have heard of that expression before? Not too many. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to test which chemicals get into us and at which concentrations. So in 2001, they were measuring 27 chemicals. The next year, they realized, we should go a little higher. They were measuring 116. And they continued until 2004, when the Environmental Working Group, which is an environmental nonprofit out of California, partnered with the Red Cross, and they did an umbilical cord test of newborn babies. So they did a random test of newborns across America. They tested the blood at day 1 of birth, and they found 287 chemicals, including 180 that cause cancer in humans and adults. So we have a little bit of a chemical problem. And it's not just in our fashion, right? The EWG, the same environmental working group, thinks that it starts as soon as we get out of bed. So by the time we've had a shower and we've shampoo, conditioner, body soap, toothpaste, deodorant, body lotion, women are wearing on average 12 personal care products and exposing themselves to 168 chemicals before they've even gotten dressed. And men, about half. And then once we take a look at the clothing, then we start to see that the body burden, that we're contributing to our own body burden with the choices that we make. And if you take a look at, let's take a look at this T-shirt and this tank, you can see that there's a whole bunch of things in the choices that maybe you weren't aware of, or maybe you didn't know that went into the processing. So contaminated with persistent, toxic, and bioaccumulative pesticides. If there's pesticides in the cotton, they don't come off in production. They stay on the jersey. If there's hazardous chemicals in production, they also stay on the garments. And we know this from the work that Greenpeace did. So Greenpeace has always been an advocate for water life. And in 2010, they decided, okay, the best way to start talking about water life and water animals is to start looking at fashion. Again, because it's the second largest polluter of fresh water, and the intensity of production of fashion is affecting the waterways. So in 2010, in one of the manufacturing hubs in China, between the Yangtze and the Pearl River Delta, they recognized that the water was running the color of the season. So curious to see if it was more than just dyes in the water, they started to take water samples. And then they realized, no, it's not just dyes. There's actually hazardous chemicals, chemicals that in the West we recognize as being restricted, should not be used in production, that are being released into the waterways. So they released their first report. They pulled the manifolds for all the factories, all the brands that were working in that region, and they went to all the brands and they said, okay, we've found these chemicals in the water. It's not you by chance, is it? And every single brand denied. And this becomes apparent when I tell you the rest of the story. So not to be deterred, in the following year, they went out, they bought 41 samples of clothes across 29 different countries of all the brands that they had on the manifold. And then they found chemical residue still on the clothes in 63% of the cases. So we know that the body burden is contributed by production choices and the choices that brands are making. But then we also started to see, and this was before Rana Plaza, that the supply chain is opaque, that brands actually really don't have kind of a line of sight to what's going in their supply chains. So even if you're trying to make better decisions, sometimes you're challenged. But I think that what we need to start doing is thinking about the choices that we make, because consumers, we hold all the power. The way that we choose to spend our money, whether it was, as Thaddeus did our little hand count, whether it's I'm spending 0% more or 50% more, whatever you choose to spend your money on is going to affect change. And so I suggest, and I won't be the only person today to suggest, that you be curious and ask questions. Try to find out where and what it's made of, and be as mindful as you can about these things. So I've given you now my inspiration, how I started. I've given you kind of where I come from, and then this is the action. So these are the things that I think that we could ponder, and the ways that we could start to make change to be more ethical and sustainable in our choices. 4 questions. The first one, do I need to buy it? So at 150 garments per year, 150 billion garments per year being produced, do you really need something new? Is it already existing in your sister, your mother's, your father's closet? Is that perfect, coat or silk dress or something already there? You know somebody who has it. All you need to do is just call them and say, okay, let's share, right? Could you rent it? Could you swap it? Could you swish it? Ray's going to have a clothes swap this afternoon. So could you just start to think about whether or not you need to keep consuming at the rate that you're consuming? Because this is part of the issue. And it's part of the issue because prior to 1950, women owned on average 9 garments, right? So in my grandmother's age, the closets were smaller. There was only 9 things hanging in there, and they cost, in kind of current dollars, about $200 each. And now, women own on average 68 garments, and they cost about $19 each. So in that very short time, we've completely shifted the consumption patterns, and we've completely shifted what we put value in. The next thing I think you should think about is who made it. Because we're at a stage now where the fashion supply chain can either contribute to poverty or alleviate poverty. And this, it can have direct impact. I think when we talk about boycotting, or we talk about kind of making decisions to save the fashion industry, I think it goes back to making decisions around your purchasing power. So rather than moving away from certain things, move towards certain things. So the World Fair Trade Federation has started to certify, which is really challenging, fair trade fashion brands, because if you think about the supply chain, from the cotton to the gin, to the cutting and sewing, to the production, like it's not coffee and bananas. To certify fashion, you have to certify everybody in the supply chain. But it's not that difficult. And now we're finding that we can have certified fair trade at the source, so certified fair trade cotton, for example, and then certified fair trade factories. And I think in the next little while, we're going to get in the middle as well. Think about what it's made of. How many of you know what textile your garment is made of right now? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, not enough. Right? And so you need to understand what it's made of. You need to know what the environmental implications are of polyester versus linen, of conventional cotton versus organic cotton. I think that it's time for us to be a little bit more textile savvy, textile literate. And then the last thing is to think about, does it match my values? And so when I wrote my book, I had a real struggle, because, and I'll share it with you today, because I think once you start to realize, okay, my consumer dollars have this power to make change, but spending it is also problematic. Our rates of consumption, these 68 garments in our closets, like, we can't buy our way out of it. But I think that if we start to think about what's really important, what we're really looking for when we buy things, that we can kind of find these 3 pillars that will match our own core values. So what I kind of distill it down to, I think if we sat down over dinner with a bottle of wine and we decided to have an argument or have a debate about what's more important, people, planet, or animals, we might have a lively discussion, right? Environmental rights, human rights, and animal rights. And when it comes to fashion, they don't always align, right? Some of the products that animal rights activists and vegan designers are using are not necessarily the most environmentally forward yet. But if you're a vegan and you support animal rights, then you need to buy from those designers. You need to follow your personal values and support the designers that also share your values. If you're somebody who believes in human rights and people, then look for fair trade certifications. Look for opportunities where you can see that the designer is really key or tied to the supply chain. They're paying attention to who makes the clothes. They're paying attention to what's happening at the end of the supply chain. And then if you're just a tree hugger and you just want to save the world, there's also brands, there's also fashion alternatives that can support that. And so I think as you start to look at the things that you buy and the things that you want to buy, you'll see that the industry is already there. When it comes to personal care products, and I'm sure we're going to see it in the marketplace today, there's products with no toxics. Clean beauty, I call it, clean personal care products, products that are kind of safe for you, safe for your family. When it comes to clothing and apparel, the same things already exist. Matter is a very good example. So this outfit that Stephanie is wearing is a social enterprise that works with organic cotton, natural dyes, takes care of the people in the supply chain, does everything and ticks the boxes. That's all I have to say, because I'm told to save time for questions.
So you've been doing this for a while, and you were definitely one of the first very, open people and people who had a blog about this kind of stuff. So I'm curious to see, how have you seen the reaction to people online, and also, the engagement, throughout that process?
We've gone like this since I started in 2008, because when I started, Vanity Fair had a green issue, Vogue had a green issue that year. I really thought that this industry was just going to go from 0 to 10% in within the first 2 or 3 years. I thought, okay, people got it with food, they're going to get it just as quick or even quicker with fashion. And then we had the recession, and so things kind of died down. And then when Rana Plaza collapsed in 2013, we also had this kind of real recollection of, oh yes, we don't have it fixed yet. That's when Fashion Revolution was established, and Carrie Summers is here today, and she's going to talk to you, I think, about that. And then the True Cost movie also came out. So I think that people all of a sudden got re-engaged, and I think it's just happening slowly and more organically. I think people are making better decisions, and I think we see that with the rise of brands like Matter, right? So you have storied brands here in Singapore already, but now we have this new brand with a new message and a new story. So I think the growth is there. It's not what I hoped it would be at this point, but I think that we're well on the way.
What do you think is the thing that really, like, the biggest problem, and how would we kind of overcome that? Like, is it education? Is it that people just want, like, the Instagram kind of problem where everyone wants to be seen in a new outfit every day? Like, what if you were to pin it down to 1 or 2 big issues that we can kind of overcome, or we can start making change with? What would you say they were?
So the number one on my things to ponder is consumption. I think consumption is still definitely an issue. I think that by and large, most of us are disconnected from a lot of the purchases that we're making. So we're driven by price, and when you're driven by price, and has anybody heard of the minimalists? Okay, so the minimalists have this great blog post where one of the founders says that he never looks at the price tag anymore because he knows that he's triggered by price. And as soon as I realized it, I realized, oh, I was raised to be triggered by price as well. And to the point where sometimes you'll buy 2 because it's 2 for 1 without even thinking, I don't need 2. So he has made a pledge to never look at the price. And he only looks at the garment. He only decides if he's madly in love with it or not, if he needs it or not, and makes a decision based on that. And so I think if you can separate yourself from this kind of lure of the value or the low cost, then you'll have you'll be making better choices right off the bat. And then end of life is a big issue. I don't know how Singapore is grappling with it, but the rest of the world, all these textiles mounding up in our closets have to go somewhere, right? And those chemical inputs that I showed you on the first slide, they don't do well in landfill, right? They still off gas. They still kind of leak into the water table. That garment is not great on your body, and it's even less great in a landfill. So I think the other issue is to really start to think about end of life. Where is this going to go, and how can I keep it out of landfill?
And so how can people do that? I mean, obviously there's clothes swapping and that kind of stuff, but a lot of the clothes that do get donated through charity end up in landfill anyway.
They don't.
They don't?
They don't.
Okay, I've been watching too many Huffington Post videos.
I mean, I think it's dependent by geography, and I think it depends on the country. But right now, most developed countries realize how toxic clothing is in the landfill, so they're figuring out solutions. If it can't be resold in the primary, there's a primary, secondary, and tertiary secondhand markets. So if it can't fit into those 3, now it's being shredded. So it's ending up as insulation, in the filling inside car doors. It's, as the underlining in mattresses between the spring and the mattress. So it's having additional lives as stuffing. And so ending up in the landfill is usually the last choice. But if you live in a country, that's why I said I'm not sure where Singapore sits on that. But if Singapore is putting it in the landfill, then you all need to change that. You need to figure out ways to get it.
Pretty sure they burn everything here. That's what I was told.
That's what they do in Japan as well.
Yeah.
That's what they do in Japan.
Can you tell us what they do here, Agatha?
Majority of waste in Singapore is actually incinerated. We have 5 incineration plants, and each one costs about 890 million Singapore dollars. So that's a lot of money that we put into building incineration plants. And so after it goes there, then all the ash, because eventually when you burn waste, it doesn't disappear. It has to go somewhere. So all the ash goes to landfill. And the landfill is actually an island offshore, and that's the space there is running out. So I think its lifespan we still have about 15 years. So something to think about, yeah.
Well, and it's so tragic if you think about all these virgin resources going in. Like, do you know how long it takes for a cotton plant to grow and somebody to pick that cotton and to use that cotton to make whatever it may, that $3.99 t-shirt or that, $199 dress. So I think being more mindful of the resources. Incineration, I know, happens a lot in Asia, but I think that we need to kind of figure out, okay, what's the afterlife? Where is this going to go?
What's your view on pesticides and GMO cottons, for instance?
Can you be a little, just in general, my view?
Yeah, well, versus there's angst with genetically modified seed, which is done as a counterbalance to having to use pesticides. So growing cotton that doesn't need pesticide.
Okay, so cotton, we could just do a whole session on cotton. So I'll talk as quickly as I can. So cotton is grown in over 80 countries. And so when we talk about cotton, we have to be very geographically specific about where we're talking. If we're talking about America, where it's tied to Texas University, and Monsanto is there, and they're developing the cotton seed right in the lab, and the farmers are getting the best technology and the best kind of advice, then I think it works. For that, right? Because then we can have kind of the growing quantities that we need. When we're talking about it in India, when we're talking about it in places that don't have the support for GMO, then I don't think it works. Personally, I'm a big fan of sustainable cotton. So there's there's actually 4 tiers now. I used to say that there was organic, sustainable, and conventional, but now I've just started to do some research about conflict cotton, which is the cotton that's grown in Uzbekistan, in Syria. So now there's really 4 stages of cotton, and I'm a huge fan of the bottom 2, but organic cotton is only about 2% of all cotton grown. So we can't all have organic cotton. I think you should have organic cotton on the places closest to you, your underwear and base layers, and then kind of build out your cotton needs from there, depending on how far away it is from your skin. But sustainable cotton, the Better Cotton Initiative is a nonprofit NGO that works with farmers to deal with what works with them geographically. So if they can do rain-fed cotton, they'll help them integrate rain-fed cotton seeds and go from there. If they need some sort of pesticides, then they'll help educate them to know which kind of pesticides they need to use and how to do pest management that works geographically. So I think when it comes to GMOs, when you take it out of Texas, you're taking it away from the brain source, and I think that that's really the problem. I mean, there's other problems, but that's the biggest problem.
You talked a little bit about price and trying not to look at the price.
Yep.
But because so many of the fast fashion brands are targeting younger audiences that don't have a lot of money or are in school, how do you motivate and encourage people to not, go to the mall and purge and purchase all of this if you really only have money that mom and dad gave you, or you haven't even started working yet? Yeah.
So I think this goes back to food, right? You can't tell young people not to eat McDonald's. They just do. They don't get that it's not good for them. They're just yeah, I love McDonald's. And I feel like fast fashion is the same analogy. So it's not good for them, it's not good for the planet, but you can't tell young kids what to do because they need to go through that chain. And I think the reason why most of us don't buy from those chains anymore is because we realize there's no value there. The price is low, the quality is low, 1 or 2 washes later, and we're done with it. So as we kind of mature as buyers, we realize that we're looking for something more, and I think that generation will get there. And so when it comes to actually face-to-face talking to them, I always talk about cost per wear, which is taking the value or the price that you pay for it and dividing it by the number of times you think you're gonna wear it or you think you can wear it, right? A $3.99 t-shirt from H&M is gonna get, 1 wash, maybe 2 washes before that weird hole starts to pop up. You're all nodding your head, you know what I'm talking about. So then that becomes a cost per wear of $3.99. Whereas if you look at a Patagonia t-shirt, or there's this brand out of India called Pact, it's organic cotton, fair trade certified factory, and it's about $30, so 10 times the amount. But you're probably gonna wear it 20 times more than the $3.99. So then it becomes $1.50 per wear. So if we can get younger people to start looking at the long term, which they do with their food choices, they do with their health, and eventually I think they do with their fashion choices.
One final question here.
Sure. Hi.
Hi. For me, I think it's still also an issue of transparency. So, do you have any tip where I could get information about sustainable brands? Because I think it's still time-consuming to research about it and to have a kind of reasonable platform or amount of different sustainable brands.
Well, there's this book called Magnifico. I think it's hard. I think it's there's not enough. Like, let's be honest. That's why I was asking who's makers. I'm really interested to see what's in the marketplace, and it's because it costs more to produce better quality merchandise. So we need to support so that we can have more brands. There's no ethical fashion shopping mall, right? There's no ethical fashion department store. I think we're all ready for the Whole Foods version of clothing. Like, we're ready for that ease and that opportunity. But do you live here? So, yeah, I wrote a post about 24 hours in Singapore that lists some designers that I think are quite ethically minded here. If you type in ethical fashion, Google will give geographic results specific. There's quite a few in Vietnam that I know about. There's actually quite a few in China. So you're looking for smaller makers. Etsy is always a great place, right? Because all of those designers are really transparent.
Thank you so much, Kate. Let's give Kate a really warm round of applause.